Assault can be charged as a hate crime, but gang assault cannot. So if one person beats up another person because of the victim's race, that assault can be charged as a hate crime. But inexplicably, if a group of people beat someone up because of their race, that gang assault, as the law calls it, cannot be charged as a hate crime. That needs to change. Rape in the first degree can be charged as a hate crime, but other sexual assaults, like forcible touching, cannot. That too needs to change. Anti-Asian slurs on a Chinese restaurant or homophobic slurs on a gay bar can't be charged as a hate crime. That too must change. And that is why we're all here today. And I thank you for covering this announcement about very, very important legislation. It's my honor to be joined by the sponsors and architects of the Hate Crimes Modernization Act, Assemblymember Grace Lee and State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal. We're also joined by our colleagues in city government, our borough president, Mark Levine, Councilmember Keith Powers, our partners in law enforcement. We have so many partners that our key partners from the NYPD. There we are. Our key partners from the NYPD, Detective Inspector Gary Marcus and Detective Phil Weisbord. We literally can't do any cases without the NYPD. We are partners hand in hand. Our hate crimes leadership with Hannah Yu, they're working literally together every day. And perhaps most importantly, all of our civic groups that are represented. The beautiful fabric of our island, and even though I'm Manhattan District Attorney, I'll speak for the entire city. This is the strength of our city. And so to stand alongside our civic groups and others who have led for so long in so many ways is truly an honor. And it makes sense that we have a diverse group standing together. As I've often said, hate crime does not discriminate. It has targeted all of our communities. And so in some ways, while we're drawn together by many good things, we're also drawn together because of hate crime. More than 2 decades ago, New York state law first recognized that bias-motivated crimes inflict harm far beyond the immediate victim. It's right there in the preamble, right there in the legislative history. These crimes traumatize and inflict fear far beyond the individual. They go to the entire targeted group. They tear, as the legislative history says, at the very fabric of our communities, undermining the mutual trust and respect that is vital to a diverse democratic society. Therefore, the hate crimes laws seek to deter these acts by increasing criminal penalties commensurate with the increased harm that come with hate crimes. When I ran for district attorney, hate crimes was at the forefront of our agenda. We talked about it. We were in the midst of an increase then. When I was my first testimony before the city council, and when I asked for additional budget, we got $1.7 million from our city partners, and we expanded our hate crimes unit using that funding. We increased the number of specially trained, cross-staffed assistant district attorneys from 2 to 17. We hired specifically trained investigators and analysts to help us build cases working hand in hand with the NYPD. And we added counselors and advocates to support survivors of hate crimes, and importantly, community outreach staff. We had some members of some communities saying, how can we trust you? You literally do not speak our language. We've changed that. We've filled roles. We've deepened out our language capability, and importantly, our cultural competency as well to serve Manhattan's many communities. Sadly, citywide hate crimes reported to NYPD have more than doubled from 2015 to 2022. Last month alone, reported hate crimes more than doubled compared to last October, and my office sadly and tragically has nearly 140 open hate crimes cases as we speak. And that brings us really to this moment and why we need these common sense fixes to our laws. The hate crime laws enumerate specific offenses that can be charged as hate crimes. If we prove that the person committing the offense was motivated by a belief or perception about the victim's perceived or actual membership in a protected class, such as race, religion, national origin, gender identity, disability, or sexual orientation, the crime and potential sentence are bumped up one level. So for example, an A misdemeanor is bumped up to an E felony to a D, and so on. The current list of eligible offenses, as I outlined just a few examples at the top, contain glaring omissions, and they do not comport with our practice, what we are seeing day in and day out in our cases with the NYPD and our interaction with survivors. Over the course of nearly a year, we've consulted with the NYPD, with our legislative partners, and with many of the civic groups here with us today to work on common sense fixes to address what are clear, glaring omissions in the statute. So today, we are here to talk about a bill that will plug those holes. We'll add 31 new eligible offenses to the hate crime statute. And again, that's born out of our collective experience. What we're seeing on our docket, what the NYPD is seeing, what our legislators are seeing, and most importantly, what our community members are seeing. I'll remind folks, this is still an underreported crime. We are still reaching out to communities to make sure they trust to come forward with us. And you can imagine the conversations when things that inexplicably can't be charged as hate crimes, we have to have those conversations with survivors and victims. While these changes have long been in the works, they are unfortunately newly urgent. The current surge in hate crimes reported to the NYPD follows a pattern, and it's a pattern that we've sadly seen many times. Bias-motivated crimes often spike following high-profile events, from anti-immigrant hate crimes in 2016, following xenophobic rhetoric during the presidential campaign, to anti-Black hate crimes following the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, to anti-AAPI hate crimes during the COVID pandemic, to more recently, anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, and Islamophobic incidents. As to the current events, I want to make it crystal clear. Harassment or violence against Jews here in Manhattan or against Muslims or Arab Americans here in Manhattan is plainly not acceptable. And more to the point of why we're here today, it is a crime, full stop. As New Yorkers, we can and should exercise our First Amendment rights to voice our opinions and petition the government about foreign policy and any other matters. We can disagree vigorously about policy. What we cannot do and what we will not accept is engaging in violence, harassment, or property destruction against our fellow New Yorkers based on religion or ethnicity or any of the other protected categories specified in the statute. My office will and does investigate and prosecute hate crimes vigorously, and with the help of the state legislature, we hope to ensure that the scope of what we do, the scope of our hate crimes law, becomes sufficient to protect all of New York's diverse communities. So with that, I want to turn it over to, I can remember having coffee with Assemblymember Grace Lee shortly after she was elected, and there were a lot of things that were on the agenda, a lot of thoughts and ideas that she wanted me to know. At the top was this issue, and so I want to thank her for her leadership and her thought partnership in this, and turn the podium over to her now.
Thank you, DA Bragg, and thank you to my partner in the Senate, Senator Hoylman-Sigal, and our city colleagues, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine and Councilmember Keith Powers, and for all the organizations who are joining us here today. I'm proud to sponsor the Hate Crimes Modernization Act to confront the very real epidemic of hate that we are facing in New York. During the pandemic, we saw an over 300% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes. In my district, where I represent Chinatown, it was an epicenter for the anti-Asian hate crimes that we have been seeing. In the Asian community in New York, it is not an exaggeration to say that we all know someone or have personally experienced an act of hate recently, whether it was being yelled at, spat at, or shoved. Even a few years ago, I was walking down the street with my young daughter when a woman threw a bottle at me and yelled anti-Asian slurs at us. But this isn't something that just happens in the Asian community. We know that many vulnerable communities across New York are experiencing this, including the Jewish, Muslim, Black, and LGBTQ communities. When we don't address or acknowledge hate, there's a long-term corrosive effect on the community. We will continue to see hate crimes repeated again and again if we don't address it and call it out. This is a complex issue that requires a diversified and holistic approach, and I have also introduced several bills to address it in other ways, including with Senator Hoylman-Sigal. We have a bill, a social media transparency bill, that is calling on social media companies to be held responsible and accountable for hate that's spread online. And I've also introduced several bills to enhance representation and education of the Asian community, to help create more education and fight the ignorance that drives hate. But today, we take another step to help us address hate and hold those who commit hate crimes accountable. Thank you.
I don't think our speakers need much introduction, but I will note as Senator Hoylman-Sigal comes up, the last time he was here, he's no stranger to one Hogan, we were talking about ghost guns and ghost gun legislation that we hope will also be passed. And a feature of that conversation was prescribing the distribution of the CAD files, the art sketchings that are the sort of architecture for printing out ghost guns. And one of the most disturbing features of that conversation that just came rushing back to me as I saw you was that in those chat groups where the CAD files are being exchanged, the thing that's most disturbing to those in the NYPD and our hate crimes unit is the hate that is in those rooms, combined with the fact that they're swapping ghost guns, which can be used clearly to harm people. So just wanted to, you don't need introduction, but I wanted to note that as I saw you. So thanks for your leadership on both these issues.
Thank you, Mr. District Attorney, and thank you to this amazing collection of advocates and representatives from our community in Manhattan and beyond. It's really an honor to be here. I'm State Senator Bragg Hoylman-Sigal, representing the 47th Senate District, which runs from the Stonewall Inn at Christopher Street up to West 103. As my colleagues like to remind me, my district is from the gay bars to Zay bars. That's what they tell me. I again want to thank the District Attorney and Assemblymember Lee for their leadership because hate crimes in the U.S. are higher than they've been in decades. And as elected officials and law enforcement, we have to step up to protect New Yorkers and hold hate accountable. That's why we're here today to announce the introduction of this important new bill to empower our district attorneys and prosecutors across the state to prosecute the full range of violent acts motivated by hate. This legislation, the Hate Crimes Modernization Act, will allow over 30 additional offenses to be prosecuted as hate crimes, including gang assault, rape, arson, and murder. There should be no loopholes for hate crimes. These criminal behaviors easily fall under the common conception of what constitutes a hate crime, but they were excluded from the legislation creating our hate crime statute in 2000. You might ask why, and I think the reason is we haven't seen the level of hate crimes in New York as we're seeing right now. Hate-fueled attacks are on the rise, targeting almost every racial and ethnic group, including LGBTQ and transgender Americans. The FBI counted over 11,600 hate crimes in 2022, the highest number recorded since the agency began tracking hate crimes in 1991, and a shocking 47% increase since 2019. And since the violence has erupted in the Mideast, violence against Jewish and Muslim communities has particularly been inflamed. In the weeks following the October 7 terrorist attack by Hamas, the ADL recorded 646 anti-Semitic incidents nationwide, a nearly 400% increase year over year compared to 2022. And there have been similarly incidents against folks of, against Islam Islamophobic incidents over the same time period, 774 complaints of Islamophobic incidents over the same time period, a 182% increase over any given 2-week period last year. What we've done in New York to defend New Yorkers against hate, we should be proud of, including by enacting legislation that helps inform the bill today. The Hate Crimes Analysis and Review Act of last session now provides lawmakers and policymakers with data disaggregated by race, gender, religion, and sexual orientation for New York City, data that shows how hate crimes against gay men, for one, have doubled since 2018. And we're also thankful to Governor Hochul for the $75 million in funding she just released to combat hate crimes. I'm going to commit, along with my Assembly partners, for even more funding for religious and community centers to upgrade their security and protect themselves from violence as we work toward this year's budget. In the meantime, we have to empower District Attorney Bragg and others to prosecute these crimes for what they are, hate and bigotry. This legislation will make law what any New Yorker knows. If a crime is motivated by bias or bigotry, then it's a hate crime, plain and simple. Let's protect New Yorkers. Let's fight the rising tide of bigotry. Let's send a message to those who might perpetrate hate crimes. New York does not welcome you, and if you commit your heinous acts, we will prosecute you. Thank you, District Attorney.
Thank you, Senator. I am honored to share a constituency with our borough president. Our jurisdiction is exactly the same, and as a result of that, we're in a number of community meetings together, and I see him travel, first virtually when we were first in office, but now physically throughout the borough and touching and leading in our diverse communities. And I thought of him when I talked about building out our language capabilities, because he is literally connecting in the language of so many different neighborhoods, which I think is not a small thing. I mean, it's one thing we heard time and time again from a lot of communities, and we've really worked hard to develop. And I go from community to community, and I see you not only having very deep relationships, but literally being able to speak in the language of so many communities of the Bureau. So I'll turn it over now to our borough president.
Thank you, DA. I'll be seeing you at Marble Hill for the Northern Manhattan meeting later today. We cover a lot of ground. This is a DA who's out there in the community. It's remarkable. I'm so grateful for the way you've stood up for the safety of every person in this very diverse borough, no matter their background, and you're doing it here today. Thank you, DA Bragg. And to my friends and outstanding lawmakers, Assemblymember Grace Lee, State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal, thank you for pushing this very important legislation. To my friend and partner in all things city government, Councilmember Keith Powers as well. You know, you can chart the rise in hate crimes in New York City to almost a precise date in 2015. And as the DA mentioned, as horrifying as the increase in the official statistics has been for New York, it is undoubtedly an undercount, in part because, as the DA mentioned, hate crimes are underreported, and we all have to do something about that collectively, but also because, in too many cases, crimes which are obviously motivated by hate are not charged as such because of the problems in the penal code that we're seeking to address today. And Keith and I confronted this directly in August when there was an attack, really vile anti-Semitic graffiti on 3 synagogues and Hatzalah, a Jewish volunteer ambulance on the east side. And we learned that it couldn't be charged as a hate crime. That same, I do want to acknowledge that I believe the DA has been able to charge in that case on a different count, and that the community took note of that and feels relieved to see your action on that, so thank you, DA. That same week, you all might recall, there was a spate of so-called swatting attacks where there were 3 synagogues in Manhattan, where someone would call in a bomb threat or some other false report that would lead the police to come in and disrupt Shabbat morning services at the synagogue. We learned that week that that also cannot be charged as a hate crime. The suspect in that case is a known white supremacist, by the way. But because false reporting, which I guess is the relevant charge in that case, was ineligible for hate crimes, those things don't appear in the official statistics. So the leaders up here, and I know for sure the DA have been working on this issue for months, even predating August, I believe. We didn't foresee the horrors of October 7th, but we're in a different world now. I want to repeat what the DA said. We've seen a doubling month to month comparing October 2023 to October 2022 in the number of hate crimes in the borough of Manhattan. Those are disproportionately far out of proportion to the percent of the population which Jewish New Yorkers are, disproportionately targeting Jewish New Yorkers. Painfully and unacceptably, these crimes are also targeting Muslim New Yorkers. And again, we're seeing Sikh New Yorkers caught up. A horrible assault on a taxi driver last week that I know the DA knows about. This is unacceptable. It gives me enormous hope to see this diversity of leaders who've come together on this and this very difficult time. We have Jewish leaders and Muslim leaders. We have African American leaders, Asian American, Latino, LGBTQ leaders, all together on this stage together, and we don't agree on everything. We agree that no one in this borough should ever be targeted because of who they are. And this legislation will put that value into practice. Let's pass it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. I mentioned the $1.7 million that the City Council and the city put into the budget, which really allowed us to expand our hate crimes unit. In addition to the enforcement work, some of which the Borough President mentioned, that's also allowed us to reach out and have, I don't know if she's Sariv, who runs our outreach. I don't see her, but she's been able to really reach out. And every law that I know I've worked on over the past, right behind me. Okay, there, okay. Who's been able to reach out and sort of, as I think about how we get this passed, I think back to every law that has made its way to signature has been because of community groups and civic groups. And so that is, as we speak, I think about the force behind that. And I'm happy that the council and the city funded us so we could expand our enforcement, but also so we can expand our community outreach and so we can be in partnership. And that is a great segue to our Councilmember Powers, who was a fighter for us in that and has been leading on this and so many other issues.
Thank you to District Attorney Bragg, and I will be the first to say we need to give you more money to continue to do that work. And I know I'll be getting a phone call around budget time on that exact sentence. But I want to thank the District Attorney. I want to thank State Senator Hoylman, Assemblymember Lee, and of course the Borough President Mark Levine as well. The Borough President touched upon it, but over the summer we had some vicious attacks on houses of worship, synagogues in my district. And as we rallied with the community and went out there forcefully to denounce them, we realized that the laws were not fit to meet that moment. And we were heartened to hear that when we talked to the District Attorney's office that they were already working on this issue. We were calling for this exact law to be introduced and hopefully passed. And we had great partners in Albany and, of course, our District Attorney who are already working on those. Those attacks we all saw so easily were completely unacceptable. And our community, religious, our community leaders, our elected officials were out there to denounce those senseless acts of hate and to call for that exact update of our hate crime laws. And thank you to the NYPD and thank you to DA Bragg. The perpetrator was indicted last month and charged with 4 counts of criminal mischief as a hate crime. And I do want to repeat what the Borough President said, which is our community is thankful for your work, but we had been out there during COVID fighting to make sure that the AAPI community was supported at times when they were under attack. And we will always stand out there to make sure that every community feels supported, because we say this sometimes, New York City is the greatest city in the world. We celebrate our diversity, but what happens to one community will happen to another community, and that's why we're here today, and that's why we are, and this coalition here is so important because we need to stand up together against any act of hate. And let me tell you, the folks that are doing this have tremendous amount of hate, and they will come for other communities as well. So we want to, I want to thank the state elected officials for taking this action at a really important time. I want to thank the DA for being on top of this issue when we were talking to them about it in August, and of course to Borough President Levine, who was one of the first up there on the Upper East Side with me, talking to leaders and making sure the community knew that we were going to not just say it, we were going to do something about it. And I think that's the most important thing. We know we have to say it, and we will keep saying it. And we have to do the outreach, we have to do the community stuff too, but we have to send a clear message to folks. This is completely unacceptable. And I'm glad that the Manhattan is leading the way, because that's what we should be doing. So thank you to everyone who's standing up here with us today. I want you to know that we will continue to stand up for every community who feels under attack. And by doing this today, this is a meaningful and tangible action in order to do that. So thank you, everyone.
So I have one, I misspoke, and I apologize, Inspector Marcus. Deputy Inspector, I apologize. I got your title wrong, and I would say I think it's because you do so much work, have you in so many different lanes and so many different titles. I demoted him by mistake, which I think is a compliment because he's in the weeds doing the work, but he's also a deputy inspector leading the work. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Sorry.